Well, thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation, Shagun. We gave everyone a little bit of homework in advance, so we can just dive straight in and get chatting. So over the past 18 months, we've witnessed some tectonic shifts in our world, exposing many fundamental cracks in our societies and systems. Just quoting some stats here, the COVID pandemic is expected to push an additional 88 million to 115 million people around the world into extreme poverty. It has exacerbated and laid bare historic systemic inequalities across gender, racial, and economic divides that have gone unaddressed for far too long. So with this pandemic having dominated over the past year and a half or so now, Shogun, can you give us a sense of what are the most significant challenges that low and middle income countries are facing, including India?
Yeah, thanks, Doris. And I'm really happy to be here today. So I think the way I would respond to this question is by saying that, at the end of the day, the pandemic is a prolonged public health crisis, which is also coming with a very high economic cost. And I think one of the most challenging things has been its dynamic and shifting nature. So you just don't know when, what's going to happen next. And I think what is particularly challenging for low and middle income countries is the fact that, one, they have weak systems in place, whether you're talking about the social protection systems that, the poor people need in these countries. Those are kind of not always very strong, where their ability to reach to these people, their ability to, deploy relief efforts, especially in the times of crisis, is not very strong. And on the other hand, there is this problem of also weak health systems. So in a way, the governments are really struggling because if they also want to open up the economy, then there is always the risk of health really suffering. And as we saw in the second wave in India, I don't know, a lot of people here must have seen the horror stories, the shortage of oxygen, the shortage of beds. And then if they try to be really stringent, then the economy suffers. So what I would definitely say is that the biggest challenge has been the fact that how do governments respond in a way that can be very streamlined, where they can reach the most vulnerable in a way that's really effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And how would the pandemic's impact have been borne by those who are already living in highly vulnerable conditions? For example, less than $1.90 a day, those we termed extreme poor, even before the pandemic began.
Exactly. So I think, Doris, I think the question here to ask is that why were these people living in these conditions even before the pandemic? I mean, in this day and age where there has been a lot of economic progress around the world, to still find these segments of population that are barely able to meet their needs, that are barely able to afford 2 square meals a day, is something which is really unacceptable. And the fact is that the reason why these people were existing, even in countries like India that have seen a lot of economic growth over the past decade or so, is the fact that there is a three-pronged problem. Number one, these people lack access to appropriate social safety nets. So what that really means is that even when governments in these countries invest in having infrastructures and having schemes and programs that can help alleviate a lot of the challenges these poor people feel, these poorest of the poor are not able to take advantage of them. They are cut off from these either because they don't have identity cards or they're pretty much sort of invisible, from the formal government system. Second is that there is lack of access to quality services, right? So in general, for this group of people to send their children to schools to be able to access healthcare becomes really problematic. And thirdly, they don't have the means to keep the public service providers accountable. They may not even be aware of what their entitlements are. So I feel like to begin with, there are reasons why they are constantly excluded. And then, of course, as you can imagine, as the pandemic hits these people who really don't have any savings and are dependent on very sort of varied means of income like agricultural laborers or daily wage laborers, all of this starts to break down. So they are obviously the most effective. And the biggest sort of, I would say the saddest part is that there is no way for the governments to know who these people are and reach out to them because they don't exist in the government's formal system. So that's how I would respond.
And that's a really big problem of them being invisible. Well, now I want to pause here and turn the question over for the audience. So thank you for the slide. So what challenges have your supported programs and communities experienced over the COVID period? And with that, I mean, it sounds a little all gloom and doom with the current state of the world, but Shagun, what gives you hope and inspiration that we can tackle the enormity of the challenges that face us in global poverty and with inequality?
Yeah, Doris, I completely agree. I think it's also important to, to talk about hope, to talk about what are some of the things that can be done and are being done. So here I would say two things. One, I think just at a very high level, I think it was really heartening to see how different types of community organizations stepped in to really reach the grassroots, to reach the last mile. And I think a lot of it is because of, the funders here today who are sort of hopefully watching this video, the fact that you were able to provide this sort of flexible funding to your partners on the ground who were able to pivot and fill the gaps that the government was not being able to fill, right? Because the reach of the last mile is definitely better. But then again, the problem with that approach is that the scale is really minimum. Like there's only that much that, NGOs can do. So here I would like to definitely speak about a particular approach that, again, hopefully some of you would have read with all these pre-reads, that Doris had shared, is the graduation approach. And what is really, I think, in my mind, what's really special about the graduation approach is that it starts with the premise that poverty is not a homogeneous group. And within, when you are looking at poor people, there are those who are poorest of the poor. And like what Doris defined as those who are even living, below $1.90 a day. So their needs are very unique. Their needs are oftentimes not met by the mainstream programs that may be existing. So this particular approach was pioneered in Bangladesh by BRAC. And what this approach is really all about is that you have to provide a sequence set of, support to these particular households. And first and foremost is, of course, to identify who these households are, right? Like we are saying that they are invisible, they're in the fringes of the society. So you need to take that extra effort to find out who these households are. And then you provide them with this time-bound intervention, which is typically for 2 years, and you give them like a big push. What that means is that you provide them with everything that it would need for them to get out of this cycle of poverty and move or graduate to the next level. So we are not saying that they suddenly become rich or they don't have these challenges anymore, but they are now able to take advantage of the opportunities that are given to them either by the government systems or by other existing NGOs. So this graduation approach is something that was really exciting. It was found to work a lot, initially in Bangladesh, and then there was this initiative by CGAP and Food Foundation where they said that, well, if this works in Bangladesh, can it work in other countries? And so this approach was tested in multiple countries using randomized controlled trials that many of you may know is like the most sort of gold standard for testing and measuring impact. And we found that not only did this work in different contexts, the impacts were sustainable. Even after you go back to these families 8.5 years after they had initially received the program, you say that they're continuously doing better, their children are better able to take opportunities, take advantage of the opportunities. So I think this is something that was really exciting. But then the question is that, well, this seems to work in different contexts. It seems to work even when other NGOs implement it. It seems to work for a longer duration of time. But can we mainstream it? Can governments adopt it? And that is the question that we've been trying to address here in India. And we are quite happy to see that, many governments have started taking a step in this direction with our work, Doris, as you're aware of, in Bihar being a very good example of what's happening.
So I think you spoke a bit about how you and J-PAL came to become involved in this type of intervention and what drew you to it. Maybe as well, it would be great to hear what it really means in terms of the transformation that you and the team have seen in the lives of the participants, for the women who are in this program. What's the impact you've seen for the communities as well?
Yeah, Doris. So I think one thing also to kind of explain here is that in majority of cases, these households are typically women-headed households. So they are households where women do not have a partner that is able to earn, and so a lot of the burden is falling on them, and which is why, again, the reason why they are in this poverty trap. So I think for us, one of the things that we've been working in Bihar, and the study is still ongoing, the program is still ongoing, so we don't have like hard impact data. But we've been doing a lot of these different types of surveys, even during COVID times. We did telephonic surveys, and it's been really great to see that how even at that scale, the women who have got the asset, and many women have already got the asset, which is a big part of this program. They are able to continue to work on their enterprise even during the pandemic. And in fact, the most recent data, as recent as July of this year, is showing that a lot of women are reporting that they will get through this crisis over the next 6 months from the income they're receiving through this enterprise or through the livestock that they have got from this particular program. And then we are also seeing that there are many other ways in which these women are really engaging. So for example, 70% of women in one of the surveys that we did of about 1,000 women reported that they are maintaining these book of records. So even something as small as how do you do your billing is that something that they're coached on, so that they're able to take their business, they're able to diversify it. Many of them have reported really liking the trainings they have undergone. They have been really appreciative of the type of hand-holding support they have gone through these community workers who are, working on these on this program. So, we can already start seeing the glimmers of this transformation happening, and we are very hopeful that at the end of the 2 years, when we do our full-fledged sort of end line, we'll see results.
That's so great to hear that there's this glimmer of hope, and also that women are being provided with the tools to navigate the challenges that they face themselves. And how is this maybe a bit different from other anti-poverty interventions that have been in the works in the past?
Overall, I think, first of all, like I said, that this is really about targeting this ultra poor. And I really want to argue that this is not a program for masses. This is not a program for your general poor, because then it will lose its essence. Its essence comes from the relativity. And imagine everyone in the village having a poultry or having a small shop, then it just won't work, right? So one of the facts is that this program is very unique, and it should not be made into something that can solve all of the problems that different types of poor face. But having said that, I do think that the lens that this program is approaching it from is to say that rather than just thinking about social protection programs that just help poor men and women cope with the result of downturns, or like a safety net type of approach, can we proactively help them to take on higher return activities with less concern about the risks? So kind of like a springboard approach. And I think that this should be also something different, because it's not just about, it's really about empowering these people to then really build their livelihoods, to really go in the direction of sustainable livelihoods, rather than just like a one-time cash transfer or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shagun. And we know that the momentum and uptake of this type of programming is increasing around the world, with the year's recent State of the Economic Inclusion report identifying 75 countries having these types of activities. And what holds huge potential for this trend, I think, as you've pointed out, and we'll come back to again, is that governments are increasingly leading the scale-up efforts so that they can leverage their public spending and investments and safety nets and jobs and livelihoods and financial inclusion as well. And giving a sense to the audience of the magnitude for leverage, with the right investments, we could be looking at a leverage of over $8 billion worth of global financing and social protection. So it really helps to leverage this to build systems that can really empower these extreme poor to grow for themselves and to be included in the economy and in the society. So with that, again, I will turn it back to the audience for a quick question break. So we will see this on a slide. What opportunities have you seen to be particularly promising in tackling extreme poverty, is what we've touched upon, but poverty as well, and supporting livelihoods, especially in the current pandemic context and given the scale of need that we've been talking about? So thank you. And really, we can't look at the face of poverty without recognizing that it's a gendered issue. And even as the pandemic has affected millions around the world, it is really women who have been some of the hardest hit. In nearly every country, a greater percentage of women has lost their jobs than men. And as schools have closed, women are bearing the brunt of the uncared paid burden of care. But as economies and systems rebuild, we do have an opportunity to respond in a way that will make us all stronger for tomorrow and equitable. So, Shogun, for you, this might seem a bit of an obvious question, but why is women's agency important as we continue to think about how we tackle poverty?
No, Doris, I don't. I mean, it is an obvious question, and for someone for whom this topic is really close to the heart, I would say that while it does seem obvious when we think about the kind of efforts that are still being made, they're really not in any way kind of commiserate with the problem that is at hand when it comes to gender inequality. So we all need to do a lot more. We all need to push this agenda a lot. So the way I would look at this is that, at JPAL, we've often defined women's agency as their ability to define goals and act on them, to make decisions that matter to them, and to participate in economy and public life. And this just seems like that's a right like that everyone should have, but unfortunately, it's not the case. And of course, gender inequality is associated with lower labor force, lower labor productivity, with poorer overall economic growth. But the fact is that not only does gender equality have an impact on women's individual well-being, it also impacts benefits to future generations and communities. And of course, above all this is the fact that just from a human rights perspective, if we want sustainable development, then having a gender equal society is really at the crux of it, which is why your SDG 5 is on this topic exactly. So I definitely think that when we are talking about programs or anti-poverty programs or programs that can help alleviate poverty, a gendered lens has to be front and center for us to be able to see a very holistic growth. That's very important.
And, really building upon that, I'm happy to share a bit on how Co-Impact approaches gender and inclusion as well, and also pull out some aspects of that from, our partnership in the graduation space. So exactly what you said, Shogun, solutions that only serve half the population is just not good enough. A better system should be producing better outcomes for everyone in an inclusive ways. And that means for girls and boys and for women and men. And as you've said as well, gender equality is a matter of justice. And this means not only getting better outcomes, but also creating new norms where women have the equal opportunity to have their voices heard, to lead and control, and to make decision-making power together. So the way that we engage in these conversations, discussions with our program partners is to frame it holistically, as you say, like taking that gender lens, because we think about, as you wear the gender lens, it's a bit like wearing tinted sunglasses. Once you've got them on, things will just look different to you and stick out to you in a different way in all aspects. And then we'd start to think, well, why did we not do this before? Why did we not see this before? All the way from problem analysis at the very root to the data that we collect, which you will be able to speak much more eloquently about, and how programs are designed, and very importantly, whose voices are heard and who gets to lead and make decisions. And I think for the graduation space, again, I'm going to turn it back to you. There's a lot of exciting things that are going on already, specifically around programming and design of the intervention that can enhance women's agency. So for my part, what I'd like to pull out is, as these programs build into the broader system, there is just so much potential to think about how the systemic elements can be more just and gender inclusive as well, so that they're not only better outcomes achieved for women, but really by women and by the decisions and the preferences that the women themselves express. So back over to you, Shogun. Given what you've said about the real transformation that you're seeing in the women's lives as a result of the program already, what's the evidence telling us about the current state of play of the sort of impact that it's having for the agency of women?
So again, that's a really good question, Doris, and I also really appreciated what all you talked about, Co-Impact's approach, and I think this is really needed because many times we just equate gendered lens with just saying that, we're, testing these different outcomes, or we are even having programs that are about women. But that there's a lot more to it, like you just explained. So in terms of this particular program or the graduation approach, I think there is, it's very obviously the fact that there is a huge potential to boost the economic empowerment of women, and that has kind of taken the center stage when we talk about the graduation approach, because like I said, it typically targets women-headed households. It is really a lot about women, empowering these women. But we also have to go beyond just economic inclusion as a starting point, because this program, as I've mentioned in the past, is really also touching upon building the skills and confidence of these women participants. It's really about hand-holding, coaching, and giving them this confidence that they can run businesses, they can go and negotiate out in the market, they can sell products. But one of the things has been that when it comes to looking at other dimensions of women's agency outside of women's economic empowerment, the evidence has been mixed. And some of this could be because even if they are earning or they are having this additional income because of the work they're doing, there may be still the household control may still not be lying with them to take all of these decisions. And also, for example, the impact on women's exposure to intimate partner violence has also been mixed and very context specific. And again, this is not surprising because gender inequality in and of itself is highly context specific. And as you touched upon norms, the social norms are like this big underlying force that can really like moderate the impact that we may see of different interventions. But I would also like to say that while we may not be seeing like the picture is still mixed, the fact is that there's also a lot to do when it comes to the types of measures we are using. For example, based on my own work in Bihar, I often find that the typical measures of women's agency are, are you able to take all the decisions? Are you able to have mobility? And when I interview these women, I've personally gone and spoken to them. They often say that, yes, we are able to go out and get medicines, we are able to go out and get food because they don't have anyone else. Similarly, they have to take all of the decisions because they don't have that kind of support. So in my survey, this will show up as highly empowered women, but actually they're highly disempowered because there's so much cognitive burden on them. They have absolutely no support. They have to do everything themselves. So I do feel that it's time to also build measures that are very context specific and do that extra step so that what we are using to measure is helping us get the real picture. And that's something that we are sort of working on in Bihar as well.
That's really exciting. And I think that's so important that you said about being cognizant of the context in which we're asking questions and which we're building programs. So to close off this segment, what else do you think is left for us to do, Shagun? Given how far graduation has got us, what do you see us taking it to next?
Yeah, Doris, and I think this is also like my response is also a lot influenced by the conversations we have had in the past, where you have also, highlighted that we really need to also unpack the impact beneath the household level. We also have to kind of intentionally measure women's agency. And like I just gave examples, like we have to start taking that extra step of developing these measures ourselves, really thinking like it's basically asking the women like what does a blue sky look for them, and then working backwards. Right? Because every woman's an empowered woman is very different. An empowered woman in a village is very different from an empowered woman in a city, for example, right? So I think we have to really ask them about their blue skies and then think about how they would like their life to be. And we definitely want to also unpack what are the opportunities as we leverage community structures, because again, one of the things is that this particular approach is really also about bringing these women back into the social fabric. Like I said, they were invisible, they were at the margins. How do they come back into the community life? And so, for example, there are a lot of questions we can ask around even COVID-19, like, what has been some of the gendered impacts of COVID and things like that.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, one for the audience, we do have a couple of questions for you two at this point, which will be showing up on the slide. So, how has the work of your program partners, your grantees, been speaking to inequalities exacerbated by the pandemic? And also, what strategies have your organization or the partners with whom you work employed to mitigate these inequities? So, Shogun, we're going a little bit back to where we started about the enormity of the issue at stake. And now, given that, who do you see as needing to be involved in the solution to this issue?
So again, I think this is really a question at the heart of a lot of the conversations that we've talked about, and I think this is something that the pandemic has really brought to the forefront, is the fact that to be able to really ensure that the damage caused by the pandemic, especially the economic damage, is really minimized, we do need to work with governments. Like, I know, again, like I said, the communities have really stepped in, community organizations have done a lot, but there is a limit to what they can reach. So I think for me, the one big thing is that by having governments incorporate this particular approach into their formal social protection systems, basically means that there's a starting point where the governments are able to reach who these people are. They're able to have access to their bank accounts. They're able to have access to who they are and look after them better. So I definitely think that, like you also said, a lot of governments are doing that already, but we really need to push this so that, you know, we may have more such cases in future of such types of pandemic and such types of crisis. At least these people are not pushed completely into a very, very distressing state. So I definitely think we need to work with governments, and it is a complex program. It has a lot of different stages to it, but by bringing the right partners together, I think we can really work closely with governments to make sure that these programs are implemented effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that's definitely the case for the partnership that we're supporting together in Bihar with Jivaka. So speaking directly to that, what are some of the opportunities that you're seeing and have experienced from this, from working in partnership to support government? And how might it be different, say, from direct NGO implementation?
So, you know, at the outset, I would say that, you know, NGOs bring immense value. And like I said, even this program was pioneered by NGOs. And the quality that they're able to bring to fore is something that, you know, the governments are typically not able to. But having said that, I think there is immense potential where NGOs can really shift from a direct implementation type of a role to providing assistance to the governments, like we have in Bihar, like the partnership that, you know, Co-Impact has kind of built, where we have got all these partners together supporting the government. So I think in my experience, what I would say is that one part is for the governments to really start acknowledging that yes, there is this group that they are not being able to reach despite all of their efforts, and that was for us the starting point in Bihar as well. And then the second point is to really take them along with you in the journey, to take them, do these pilots, do these demonstration pilots, you know, take them for these visits, make them see what's happening on the ground. And of course, all of this, you need champions, you need, you know, people in the governments who can really push this through. But I would say that of all, there like being so many different topics and there being so many different kind of decisions the government has to take, ultra poverty is one thing where you do feel that there is that intent to try to make it work. And so there is a lot more openness in governments to programs such as this one. So the way I would say this is that you know, we will have to kind of look into supporting the governments, also building with them learning and data systems that can provide them with this support.
Thank you. And if we might go to, you know, would you be able to give us a little bit of a light on how the momentum is now with this program in Bihar that we're supporting, and where it's heading with the government's ownership of this?
So I think the way this is working right now is that the government of Bihar started with this big commitment in 2018 to say that they wanted to reach out to 100,000 ultra poor households in the state. And the state is pretty big. It has like 38 districts, and it was a really big program where the government had to embed it in its system. It had to set up an entire infrastructure that can, you know, really roll this out. And it's been really heartening to see that that as this program is progressing, as they have identified more and more of these ultra poor for whom this program is working, there is an increased push from other departments in the government to now work with this particular cohort to work to deploy different types of innovations, whether it's for learning, whether it's for insurance, to ensure that they start having access to multiple other things in their lives over and above this particular approach. There is also this interest in the government to see if they could expand it to more number of households. So to that extent, it definitely seems like this program has resonated with the government, and they are planning to build on it further.
That is so great to hear, because it's showing, as well, scale is not just about numbers. Obviously, that's really important, but that once it starts institutionalizing, there is so much more depth that in ways in which it could grow beyond if it was being done in a vacuum, kind of by itself for the community. But this type of approach obviously adds complexity, right? So what are some things to watch out for those who are hoping to pursue this route? And also, if you were to give some advice to us funders who want to support this work, what would it be?
So I think what I would say, Doris, is that one of the things to really understand is that the gestation period for something like this to come to its fruition, where the government does take this big step to invest in it, is oftentimes long. So what is really needed is a longer term commitment. It is needing this kind of an appetite to, yes, take that risk, go into the unknown space. But I am convinced, with my own experience working in many different states, that it took us time. But when you get there, you realize that the government, for example, in the case of Bihar, spent $115 million. And then with the support that you are providing us, we are able to ensure that there is quality at scale. Because at the end of the day, one of the big compromises everyone talks about when you move from an NGO to a government implemented is that the quality is lost. But then having partners such as ourselves, such as Bandhan Konagar, come in and really work with the governments to take care of their needs is immensely helpful. So I think my big advice is that for people who are willing to take the step in this direction, or even for that matter, other types of approaches within the field of poverty and livelihoods, it does require a long-term hat. It does require an appetite where you will not see quick results, but don't lose hope. And of course, on the government side, there should, we have this checklist in our mind, which tells us how interested is the government really. And when we talk about government, of course, there's a bureaucratic arm, there's a political arm. So I would say that it's really important to also deep dive a little bit into this, to really think about this. It's not advocacy piece, but influence piece, right? Like, what are the things we are doing rather than just going and saying, hey, this approach works, just take it. What are we doing to take an extra step to see how the government can really embed this in their existing system? So again, something Co-Impact really talks about, the systems level approach. I think it's really important to have that lens, if you want to work in this direction. So I would actually now like to turn it back to you, Doris, with a question that what might be some things that you would like to share with this group too, on this point, given that you've been providing us such excellent support throughout. So over to you.
Thank you, and that's very kind of you. And this is really an invite for the group to share and learn from each other. So for us, definitely taking that longer term view, we saw as being really important. So giving 5-year funding, be as flexible as we can be, because as you've highlighted, Shagun, there's so many questions that you, the partnership on the ground, need to ask. Ask to make sure this program is able to course correct, to progress in a way as you navigate this together with government. So what can we do as funders to give that space, to empower you to ask questions, really, that really drives quality work, serves the communities on the ground? And sometimes that might mean we have to ask less and cede the space for you to be able to listen to the communities, have the time to talk to the communities, and make sure those voices are brought in. So I will end there. And again, just one last question for the audience, which will be showing up on the slide. What are ways in which you've been thinking about supporting scaling and scalable solutions? And with that, I just want to say a big thank you, Shagun, for joining me for this conversation, which I hope gives some spark to the conversation that will follow in the room. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Doris. It was very enjoyable.